Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is AL24 News and this is our main stories for the 30th of January 2022. India reported 2.47 lakh new coronavirus cases today. The country tally now stands to 3.63 crore, which include 5,000 cases of Omicron COVID variant over 28 states. US inflation hits its fastest pace in nearly 4 decades last year as pandemic-related supply and demand imbalances, along with stimulus intended to shore up the economy, pushed prices up to 7% annual rate. Lebanese truck and bus drivers and others blocked main roads in the capital and other areas on Thursday in protest at the failure of politicians to address an economic crisis that has sent the currency into a tailspin and driven prices sky high. Land sales revenue fell in most Chinese local government in 2021, damaging their budget as Beijing called faster spending to counteract the slowdown of housing market. Russian troops to withdraw from Kazakhstan this week. Well, this withdrawal comes days after US officials expressed concern that Russian troops would overstay their welcome. And welcome. Those were today's headlines. India saw new cases of COVID. New cases soared to nearly 225,000 as the country saw the largest single-day increase in infections since May 16, 2021. As the nationwide surge in cases propelled by the Omicron variant continue to soar. Wednesday cases count on 2,464 means that the daily cases have now grown more than 10-fold in less than 2 weeks, a speed of rise in infections previously unseen in the 2 years of pandemic in the country. Pakistan reported more than 3,000 new coronavirus cases as 45% increase from the day before, and the first time in the nearly 4 months with the daily infection exceeded 3,003,019 additional incidents were discovered in the last 24 hours, up from 274 on Wednesday. Positive sentiments increased to 6.12% from 4% the day before. The World Health Organization will consider whether to extend the global public health emergency today with the help of an independent committee of experts. The current public health emergency of international concern has been in place for almost 2 years due to the coronavirus pandemic. Dutch's press agency reported the committee planned to make a recommendation by evening, and the World Health Organization usually follows its advice.
More than 15 million new cases of COVID-19 were reported to WHO from around the world, by far the most cases reported in a single week. The sheer number of cases also means more pressure on already overburdened and exhausted health workers. Protecting those most at risk also helps to protect health systems and health workers.
In a new poll, a slight majority of Americans said schools should move to remote learning to prevent teachers and students from being exposed to COVID-19. A Harrison poll provided exclusively to Axios, released Wednesday, found 56% of U.S. adults said they support remote learning due to the risk of COVID-19 exposure. Meanwhile, 44% of respondents said it's more important to keep classrooms open for in-person learning to not cause interruption in students' education. After being accused of attending a social gathering at the Downing Street back in May 2020, Boris Johnson has apologized for attending the event in the back garden of 10 Downing Street at a time when Britons were prohibited from gathering due to strict coronavirus restriction. More with Nabil Khazini.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologizes for attending garden party during coronavirus lockdown, saying that he didn't know that the lockdown party was actually a party. The Prime Minister conceded that he had attended the Downing Street garden gathering on May 2020, saying he believed this was a work event at the time.
And I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules. I believed implicitly that this was a work event.
An excuse that didn't satisfy Chris Bryant from the Labour Party, who said Johnson was making fools of those cheering this shower of shenanigans over the Downing Street lockdown party.
The Prime Minister didn't spot that he was at a social event. That's the excuse, isn't it? Come off it. I mean, how stupid does the Prime Minister think the British people are? The worst of it is, he's already managed to completely destroy Allegra Stratton's career. He's tarnished the reputation of Lord Geit. And now he's making fools of every single MP who cheered him earlier. Every single one who goes out on the radio and television to defend this shower of shenanigans.
Johnson said he came to the Commons to make amends, but he was going to ignore Bryant's advice.
I don't agree with him, Mr. Speaker. I've come to this House to make amends, to explain what happened on May the 20th and to apologise. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ignore his advice.
The story started when a leaked email showed one of his top officials invited more than 100 Downing Street staff to a Bring Your Own Booze party during the first lockdown, where Boris Johnson attended with around 30 other people.
The prices of consumer goods in the United States increased by 7% in 2021, the largest rise since June 1982, which is major concern for U.S. President Joe Biden, who promised to stop this spiral. قناة واتفورو.
Official data showed that annual inflation in the United States rose to its highest level in 40 years, driven by high energy prices and damage to supply chains by the corona pandemic. The Bureau of Labor Statistics said in the latest data release that the Consumer Prices Index (CPI) in the United States, the main determinant of inflation, increased in December by 7% on an annual basis, the fastest increase since June 1982, when it recorded 7.1%. The CPI increased in November by 6.8% on an annual basis. The Bureau of Labor Statistics attributed this increase in the overall inflation rate, in particular, to the rise in the prices of housing and used cars and trucks. They stated also that food groups contributed to the rise in inflation, despite the fact that the prices of this group rose at lower rates in December than in recent months. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell responded that the central bank will use tools to support the economy and a strong labor market and to prevent higher inflation from becoming entrenched during testimony before the Senate Banking Committee.
The economy has rapidly gained strength despite the ongoing pandemic, giving rise to persistent supply and demand imbalances and bottlenecks and to elevated inflation. We know that high inflation exacts a toll, particularly for those less able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are strongly committed to achieving our statutory goals of maximum employment and price stability. We will use our tools to support the economy and a strong labor market and to prevent higher inflation from becoming entrenched. We can begin to see that the post-pandemic economy is likely to be different in some respects, and the pursuit of our goals will need to take those differences into account.
The rise in inflation slowed to 0.5% in December, from a 0.8% increase in November. However, core inflation, excluding food and energy, recorded a monthly increase of 0.6%, compared to an increase of 0.5% in November. This has been underlined by President Joe Biden in a prepared statement.
Today's report, which shows a meaningful reduction in headline inflation over last month, with gas prices and food prices falling, demonstrates that we are making progress in slowing the rate of price increases. At the same time, this report underscores that we still have more work to do, with price increases still too high and squeezing family budgets.
This increase in inflation rate would put pressure on the U.S. Federal Reserve, the central bank, to tighten monetary policy by reducing its holdings of bonds and security and raising interest rates. The inflation rate is currently much higher than the level targeted by the U.S. central bank at 2% in the medium term.
Lebanon's series of demonstrations continue as the strike started due to the surge of the fuel prices. A day of anger succeeded as roadblocks in several areas of Lebanon. Marwa Al-Awar has more to be clarified.
In a continuous number of protests due to the deteriorating living conditions, anger erupted, leading to roads closure across Lebanon as another general strike was called by the land transportation unions in cooperation with the General Labor Union. The announcement called for an immediate implementation of a general strike in all Lebanese regions, protesting government unwillingness to sponsor the sector as an uncontrollable surge of fuel prices emerged. Many labor sectors were participating in the strike, such as the Vans Syndicate, the Farmers Syndicate, and the Truckers Syndicate.
The strike for drivers' unions, union leaders, and land transport sector in general will not be halted by anything. What is needed is to begin assisting the land transport sector as promised by Prime Minister Najib Mikati and the concerned ministers, but they have not fulfilled their promise yet. The road transport sectors, federations and unions are members of the General Labor Union in Lebanon, and because the latter is holding elections for office, movement will be restricted between 6 and 10 a.m. to allow participation in the General Labor Union's election.
According to Lebanon's Traffic Management Center, several main roads in the capital were closed, as well as some roads linking Beirut in Lebanon's northern and southern parts. However, security forces have taken tight measures to keep a peaceful strike.
I call all the Lebanese and all the workers to participate in the strike as it is necessary.
Employees of many public and private institutions were advised to stay home, and Minister of Education and Higher Education Abbas Al-Halabi announced the closure of schools, institutes, and secondary schools. The Association of Banks also announced the closure of banks.
Novak Djokovic has been named the #1 seed for the next week's Australian Open, despite the fact Prime Minister Scott Morrison has tonight made it clear he could still be deported. Immigration Minister Alex Hawke is weighing exercising his discretionary powers to revoke the Serb's visa over the concerns about the star's medical exemptions for Australia's COVID-19 vaccination requirements. This year, the United Nations needs about $3.9 billion to help millions of people in Yemen, according to what was announced by the United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator Ramas Raja Singham. The United Nations officials said during a meeting of the Security Council that the biggest obstacle currently is finding funding to help about 60 million people in Yemen, where a civil war has been going on for more than 7 years. The Regional High Court in Koblenz, Western Germany, issued a life sentence against former Syrian intelligence officer Anwar Raslan, 58 years old, accused of crimes against humanity. The officer is responsible for killing detainees and torturing thousands of others in a secret regime prison in Damascus between 2011 and 2012. An abrupt withdrawal of foreign aid last year following the hasty U.S. exit the Taliban victory in August left Afghanistan's fragile economy on the brink of collapse, with food prices rising rapidly and causing widespread hunger. The Taliban administration that seized control of Afghanistan proposed a joint body on Wednesday of its officials and international representatives to coordinate billions of dollars in planned aid. After the order of demolishing 39 buildings, Evergrande Group has been prevented to complete the Ocean Flower Island project under the pretext of the environmental concerns. Meanwhile, analysts underline the impact that this would have been on the Chinese market. Islam Sidon, what follow?
Another stumbling block was encountered during the development of Ocean Flower Island via the Evergrande. On December 30th, the local authorities stepped in and gave the business 10 days to remove 39 buildings constructed with unlawfully acquired licenses. The Evergrande Group publicly verified the demolition order on January 4th and was preparing to dispute the process. Construction is temporarily halted, and the final results have not yet been made public. This $25 billion project is considered as the world's largest artificial island, covering 7.8 square kilometers and housing up more than 200,000 people. Based on these steps, it appears that the municipality's primary goal is to prevent the project from being completed. As a result, the government retains ownership of the artificial islands, allowing it to acquire the freshly constructed island and sell it to another developer. It has been demonstrated that this environmental message is really a pretext to break the Evergrande. If they are successful in selling the property to another developer, all they need to do is notify the new business of the first cost of environmental refurbishment. Analysts have long been concerned that Evergrande's failure will aggravate larger impact in China's property market, harming homeowners as well as the broader financial system. Evergrande, China's second largest property developer by sales in 2020, is saddled with almost $300 billion in total liabilities. Analysts cautioned, however, that China's real estate crisis remains a lurking concern.
China's activities in the South China Sea, including its historic claims on almost all parts of the vital trade route, gradually undermine the rule of law in oceans and universally recognized provisions in its international law. The U.S. has concluded in a new report that the U.S. State Department said in a report that the overall effect of Beijing claims was that it unlawfully claims sovereignty or some form of exclusive jurisdiction over the most of the South China Sea. A top Sri Lanka prison officer has been sentenced to death for execution-style massacre of 27 inmates, which drew international criticism. The Colombo High Court on Wednesday found prisoners Commissioner Emily guilty of the November 2012 killings, but released his so-accused police commando Moses Rangawesh. The United States announced that it will propose to its 14 partners in the United Nations Security Council to expand the scope of sanctions imposed on North Korea after Pyongyang recently launched ballistic missile in the test that violated the United Nations resolution issued against it. This comes shortly after the U.S. Treasury and State Department announced that the United States had imposed new financial sanctions on 5 North Koreans for the association with Pyongyang weapons of mass destruction program. Over 2,000 Russian-led troops began withdrawing from Kazakhstan after being deployed when peaceful protest of an energy price hike turned into an unprecedented violence, claiming dozens of lives. Osama Ayedi.
Moscow announced on Thursday that over 2,000 Russia-led troops began withdrawing from Kazakhstan. The withdrawal comes only a week after they were deployed to the ex-Soviet nation on the request of its president, who was seeking to disperse extremely violent mass protests. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday said the deployment had been crucial, claiming victory in defending Kazakhstan from what he described as a foreign-backed terrorist uprising. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev said on Wednesday that Russian and allied forces played a very important role in terms of stabilizing the situation in the country during his first visit to the country's main city, Almaty.
Collective peacekeeping forces are starting to prepare equipment and material for loading into the plans of military transport aviation of the Russian aerospace forces and returning to the points of permanent deployment.
Kazakh authorities say order has been largely restored in the nation of 19 million, and that almost 10,000 people have been detained over the unrest, with the hunt for others ongoing.
Without a doubt, it was of a great psychological importance in repelling the aggression of terrorists and bandits. The mission can be considered very successful.
The demonstration started on January 2nd in western Kazakhstan, with local residents outraged by a sharp rise in fuel prices, and quickly spread nationwide. Descending into violence within several days, protesters stormed government buildings and set them ablaze, and dozens of people were killed in clashes with the country's security forces.
According to officials, landslide and flooding triggered by torrential rains have killed at least 15 people in southeastern Brazil. The victims died between Sunday and Tuesday in the state of Minas Gerais, where rivers overwhelmed, partially submerging communities. Over 28,000 individuals have been forced to flee their homes. 5 members of the same family, 2 of whom were youngsters, were discovered buried on mountainside near Belo Horizonte, the state capital. And an 11-year-old girl was killed when a wall in her bedroom fell on her while she was asleep. The World Bank has listed security tension, low COVID-19 vaccination and inflation as major factors that could dampen investment and economic recovery in Nigeria and some other sub-Saharan African countries this year through the 2023. The institution stated that this is the January global economic prospects, which downgrade global growth to 4.1% on account of many risks and considerable uncertainty. It equally estimated Nigeria's growth to moderate to 2.5%. And now for more international news in this roundup.
Prince Andrew is getting closer to a civil trial in front of a New York jury, but his legal team will try again later to get the case dismissed. The Duke of York's attempt to have a sexual assault civil case dismissed was unsuccessful. The judge refused to dismiss the case brought by Virginia Giuffre following a public hearing in New York on Wednesday.
The United States ambassador to the United Nations rejected the 5-year transition proposal of the Malian ruling junta. The head of the Malian junta has found a new opponent to his electoral timetable in the person of the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Some voices were raised within the Security Council to reject Bamako's plan for a 5-year transition before elections.
At least 3 people, including 2 children, died when a church collapsed on the outskirts of the southeastern Nigerian city of Asaba, while 18 others were rescued alive from the rubble. The tragedy occurs 2 months after a building under construction in Lagos collapsed, killing at least 45 people and causing widespread outrage.
According to media, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un advocated for boosting the country's strategic military forces while watching the hypersonic missile launch. The purported launch was spotted by authorities in South Korea and Japan.
Since January 2nd, violent clashes between leftist armed groups have left at least 30 people dead and an unknown number of people displaced or confined to their houses near the Colombian-Venezuelan border. The fighting was between members of the National Liberation Army and members of a dissident faction of Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia.
China has developed the world's first artificial moon on Earth, simulating the low-gravity conditions. China's future lunar missions are expected to rely heavily on the facility. The artificial moon project in the eastern city of Zhongzhou is likely to be officially launched in the coming months, according to scientist Li Ruling of the China University of the Mining and Technology.
Oil prices have hit high levels, and according to officials, this would be short-lived, majorly among the surge of Omicron variant, which already had an economic impact on the sector. More in this report.
As coronavirus infections rise around the world, oil jumped approximately to 4% on Tuesday, supported by tight stock, and it is expected that the spread of the Omicron variant will not disrupt the global demand recovery. Brent crude rose from $285 to $83.72 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate rose from $2.99 to $81.22 a barrel as well, which is seen as the highest since early November. According to market sources citing American Petroleum Institute, U.S. crude records dropped by about 1.1 million barrels last week. Demands have been increased since 2021, reaching pre-pandemic levels, at a time when OPEC Plus slowly eased record output cuts made in 2020. However, absence of capacity in some OPEC countries in which supply additions cut below 400,000 barrels per day. According to U.S. Federal Reserve Chairperson Jerome Powell expectations, the economic impact of Omicron is short-lived.
Omicron has yet to wreak the havoc of the Delta variant and may never do so, keeping the global recovery on track.
A recent suspension in Libya has also held prices down. A national oil corp said it will suspend exports from the Isara terminal.
Combination of facts that demand is going to be stronger than anticipated and that OPEC's supply may not grow as fast as the demand is why prices are climbing.
Euro-oil stock data show that crude oil and petroleum products stocks in European refineries have fallen to 11% earlier this year. Meanwhile, European margins in kerosene refining are once again reaching pre-pandemic levels due to the increasing global aviation activity in spite of the widespread of the Omicron. The U.S. government has raised up its forecast for oil demand while lowering its forecast for oil production growth. Production was expected to rise by 640,000 barrels per day in 2022, lower than yesteryear's estimate of 670,000 barrels per day increase. Total oil demand now seen growing to 840,000 barrels per day, higher than the 700,000 barrels per day increase expected last month. It is estimated to rise by another 330,000 barrels per day in 2023.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder for our main stories. India reported 2.47 lakh new coronavirus cases today. The country tally now stands to 3.63 crore, which include 5,000 cases of Omicron COVID variant over 28 states. US inflation hits its fastest pace in nearly 4 decades last year as pandemic-related supply and demand imbalances, along with stimulus intended to shore up the economy, pushed prices up to 7% annual rate. Lebanese truck and bus drivers and others blocked main roads in the capital and other areas on Thursday in protest at the failure of politicians to address an economic crisis that has sent the currency into a tailspin and driven prices sky high. Land sales revenue fell in most Chinese local government in 2021, damaging the budget as Beijing cut fastest spending to counteract the slowdown of housing markets. Russian troops to withdraw from Kazakhstan this week. Well, this withdrawal comes days after U.S. officials expressed concern that Russian troops would overstay their welcome. That's all what we have for now. Stay tuned for our official edition at 6. Bye-bye.